Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another of our conversation platforms at DAG. It's always a pleasure to welcome all of you to DAG and to share our world of art and the kind of reaching out that we do with art to try and establish connections that are multidisciplinary, reach out beyond and beyond the world of just pure visual art itself. These conversations are meant to stimulate interest in how we look at art, how we look at literature, how we look at popular culture, etc. And our conversation this evening comes in, I think, at a particularly sensitive time when the world is in a sensitive, fraught situation, where we are seeing many of the things that, in fact, we hope to be talking about this evening through Chitta Prasad's painting, the seminal work that we have behind us called Bangladesh War, and of course, Raghu Rai's own images of what was occurring in Bangladesh at that point in time when he journeyed there and what he saw and connected with, and how, over a passage of time, we read either the paintings or the art or the photographs and what they imply, what messages they communicate to us over this period of time. So to kickstart the conversation, and before I get into the presentations itself, just a few points that I'd like to raise. How do you look at art and how does it connect, and what are the stories it tells us in terms of what we are seeing by nature of incursive political, social, cultural hegemony that occurs. We look at, let's say, what happened in 2015 when a Syrian child was photographed lying dead on a beach in Turkey, with the family trying to escape into Greece. That entire episode of migration and the discussion that followed around the world, and perhaps the changes that occurred politically in mindsets in countries around the world. In 2015, of course, the Indian photographer Rohit Chawla then worked with the Chinese activist artist Ai Weiwei to recreate that same image, and that same image was shown in the 2016 edition of India Art Fair for the first time here. Now, part of this, of course, this recreation creates a message when when a very powerful artist like Ai Weiwei takes this message out. But it's also a little disturbing, this kind of recreation and the message that it's sending out. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to say, etc.? And what are we usurping through that messaging? So I think somewhere we need to be conscious of our role as people who are close to what are obviously human tragedies of a very large scale. How do we look at those tragedies? How do we separate ourselves? What is the intent somewhere? And I think I'd be very happy to hear what Raghu particularly has to say about it. I just have one other image that I thought I'd share with you. There was also another very well-known photograph of this little girl child running away after the napalm bombing in Vietnam. That photograph again went viral around the world, and it was recreated as a painting by an Indian artist called K.C.S. Panikkar, who was responsible for the Madras art movement and establishing Cholamandal Artists Village. That particular large painting, which is of course on the cover of this book, was a center point for an exhibition that was held, I think, in 1976, inaugurated by Mrs. Gandhi. Again, the point somewhere is the same. I mean, that's the painting, this child fleeing. It's a very large painting, holding onto a bomb. The clothes have been torn off in that bombing, etc. And the sheer fear on this child is really something that is horrifying. These images have a great human connect, but what do we do with them? How, I mean, are they supposed to just be a certain poignant moment? Or do they tell us a story of a certain period in time? Are they actually frozen in that time? Or does that messaging take us forward somewhere? I am going to devote 5 minutes, with your indulgence, to this painting that we have behind us by Chitra Prasad and take you through some highlights. Very quickly, I'll share some quick highlights of Chitra Prasad, of course. Chitra Prasad was this Bengal artist who was born born in the 24 Parganas, North 24 Parganas, but lived his early life in Chittagong, was self-taught as an artist, worked with the Communist Party of India, initially did a lot of work, drawing, illustrating, etc., for their journal called People's War, People's War, that became People's Age post-independence. His most powerful body of work is the famine that he covered in 1943-44 across both sides of Bengal at that point in time, when it was being neglected by most media, most mainstream media, in India as well as overseas. So it really was the CPIM that was covering it. Went on to do a lot of protest posters, etc. And then in 1971, he paints this seminal work, and I'll just share some details on that work. So if we can just go through the slides, please. So that is Chitra Prasad, very good-looking young man at that point in time. Next. Joins the CPIM, etc., etc., does a lot of sketches and portraits of leadership of Marxists, etc. Next. These are his famine works, very, very strong and coruscating body of work on what actually happened. And what he did was actually very, very journalistic. Each of these drawings, and many of them were used to actually illustrate, as I mentioned, People's War and Jagyut, had details of who these people were. He gave them the dignity of inquiring about them, whether they were dead bodies or living people, where they lived, what their names were, what their castes were, what their professions were, what aid they had been given by the government or not been given by the government, where this illustration was made. Next, please. Some more of those images. Very, very powerful. Next, please. And how they were used. So images like this were used then journalistically. So it was, in a sense, a very documentative record that he was creating. Next, please. Went on in 1945. He was based out of Bombay to create a small journal or a small book, actually, called Hungry Bengal, which was like a travelogue through this famine, famine-hit areas, and what he saw over there, what he illustrated. Copies of this were seized in the press. 5,000 copies were printed, were seized in the press. All copies were burnt. There was just one extant copy that survived because he'd sent it to his mother in Calcutta. So, I mean, the plates were destroyed, etc., etc. That's how harsh the government was. Next, please. Went on then to, that's the journal in 1947, where it's already changed from People's War to People's Age. And of course, the kind of illustration he's doing through the 50s and 60s that keeps changing. Next, please. Very aware of political situations around the world. Next, please. As well as in India. Next, please. Did posters for the 1953 film by Bimal Roy, Do Biga Zameen. Next, please. Also did some very endearing work, and this is particularly true of the late 50s and through the 60s, etc., where he looked at, there was this kind of Soviet idealization of what the world should be, the nuclear family, the role people played in building a nation. And he was very driven by that idea of creating this kind of society. Next, please. So images coming from there, these are, of course, his lino cuts. And then did an illustrated Ramayan in the 60s. This was never published, but it was very beautifully done. And finally, of course, we come to 1971 and this painting. The highlights of this painting are quite extraordinary if you look at the range of what he's telling us. And it was from this painting that the idea of this evening's discussion was born. where we have a central figure and various narratives taking place on either side. And I'll take you through the highlights. If you look at it, there's the central figure, the idea of a motherland. In the central orb, you have what was on the 2nd or 3rd of March 1971 created as the map of Bangladesh. Of course, eventually the map of Bangladesh became just that circle without the outline of the country that it notifies. And of course, the forces that are coming in from West Pakistan and what is happening in East Pakistan on the right side, etc. Next, please. So I just want to share how powerful his narrative is within the painting. You know, you have the uniformed generals with their tanks swarming into what is East Pakistan. The kind of invasion that occurs in March when the forces march into what was East Pakistan or the eastern arm of Pakistan, etc. There's this great profusion of the army coming in, the soldiers with their guns and bayonets, etc. And you see that kind of hatred with which he represents these forces. Next, please. And look at the figure that he creates. For him, the Mukti Bahini is a force that is taking charge of itself. In Raghu's photographs, we will see the victimization of course, the Mukti Bahini as well. But over here, look at the figuration itself. Look at the way the woman holds her clenched wrist, her expression, her eyes. She's very, very confident of what she is doing to kind of fight for the independence of her land, of her people, to the kind of respect she's bringing to the language. Urdu was being forced down Bengali tongues, and that was one of the major issues of difference between East and West Pakistan. Look at the way her foot kind of pushes the now skeletal figure of the uniformed person away. I also love the depiction that Chitra Prasad does of the sun kind of broiling over them and the fire that kind of is firing literally the people of what goes on to become Bangladesh. Next, please. If you look at the central figure, this is where you have the idea of a nation being born. This painting was made in May 1971. Liberation Day was 25th March that year. And of course, 16th December is when independence actually happens. So in a sense, Chitra Prasad is making this work with hope, with anticipation, and a degree of prescience about what is going to be born. A nation is going to be created. There is a motherland that is being created. An Islamic nation, true, but the figure of the woman represents the mother figure, the nurturing figure. And the nurturing figure, look at what she's surrounded by. On top, the figure of a scholar who's facing the cannons. Below, you have the whole idea of rural bounty, a shepherd, a cow, etc. So he brings in these figures specifically to create the idea of a society that is rising from rural roots. On top right, the whole idea of a lamp and veneration. It's partly veneration of the motherland, but also veneration of knowledge, of moving away from ignorance. And finally, of course, the bowel singer, who represents a continuity of the past, but also a sense of culture being a very, very important part of the new nation that is being born. Next, please. The mother figure herself. Just look at her expression. Over her, the orb, which is the map of Bangladesh, her very benign kind of countenance, unlike the lady who's fighting the forces. And in her hands, she holds paddy. She holds a pitcher of water. So that sense of plenitude, of hopeful prosperity, etc. I also like the fact that on her feet, he puts anklets, metal, silver somewhere. Very idea of prosperity somewhere. It was very, very important to him as a part of nation building. Next, please. So again, I just love the contrast in the expression and the eyes that he builds in between the lady fighting the forces, and when you have achieved or hopeful of achieving the state of nationhood, that was the struggle somewhere. Next, please. The painting, next, please. And that's, of course, Chitta Prasad actually posing with the painting, etc., something that you don't normally have Chitta Prasad doing with his other works. Next, please. And that's where we are. So thank you. I really wanted to share details of this painting, etc., because for me, here is the birthing of a country, the embryo that it comes from, and the shape that the artist hopes to provide the nation with. I think that's very brilliantly captured in one single work, making it his most seminal painting so far. I will be moving to Raghu now, and of course we'll go through the slides. But Raghu Rai, of course, as a photographer, it's very, very interesting that he goes into what is East Pakistan, arrives in Calcutta, drives into what will become Bangladesh, etc., and does this extraordinary body of photographs. In 1972, he gets his Padma Shri for the body of work that we're about to see. So it is a great honor to have you here, Raghu. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation with us. He will move into the slides as you want them, whatever speed you want them, etc. But if you can start by sharing that story of where this archive was and how this was recovered. I think there's a story there that I don't know of, and I'd love to hear it.
Thank you. I will. But before I begin to speak about that story, losing the archives, okay, I must say, first time I have realized how a critic can write a whole history through one painting. Wonderful. I wish you will write something about my body of work on Bangladesh. There'll be several volumes of books. No, of course, it is very powerful. There's no doubt about it. But then the style of describing in detail, it's so magical. Wonderful. देखिए, पहली बात, when India-Pakistan partition took place, I think I was 5 years old as a young boy, and I was being taken through the woods, crossing all kinds of places, and maybe I don't remember many things now, which I have forgotten over the years. The only thing I remember, in Pakistan, in Jhang, my hometown, this narrow street had double-story houses on left and right, and after about 300 meters at the end of the lane was our house, which was 3-storied big house. And then our house also opened into the back lane, another street. So I remember only that my whole family, everybody, we had climbed up the rooftop and watching the houses burning. And I, as a little boy, didn't understand what was going on. And then people started coming to our house, all the neighborhood people, because they knew that we can escape from the other side. And that's what happened in the middle of the night. But while, I was working with the Statesman newspaper, our headquarters was in Calcutta. So they wanted me to come to Calcutta to photograph the refugees coming into India. And the point was, Pakistan's propaganda was so good that the world did not believe when Indira Gandhi and other leaders said, we have several million refugees walking into India. Because Pakistanis were so shrewd and clever in their propaganda. So I go to Calcutta, And from the airport, we drive down towards the border. And the same months, July, August, when India-Pakistan partition happened and when Bangladesh was to be born, same months, raining, pouring. And I had 3 lenses, wide angle, normal, and a telephoto. And when I saw hundreds of people walking in and in dead silence, because everybody, there was nothing to be shared between them because they had the same tragedy they were facing, and dripping with the rain. And I could see myself as one of the young boys crossing Pakistan into India. Maybe when I look back and the work I have done, also I was 5 years old when the partition took place, and I was 5 years old as a photographer when I took these pictures. And now when I look back, I say, my God, you know, some of the images, emotions, spaces are so powerful. And maybe that those childhood memories, hidden, buried somewhere, were getting related to these situations. I said, wow. And like a hungry man, I went into those people's lives, wherever they'll stop, whatever is happening. And I was photographing like somebody who doesn't have a head, only the heart. And maybe that's why I have managed to capture those inner emotions. Because when you think and work from the head, it becomes very informative kind of response, you know. And this I was doing, I think once a month I'll go to Calcutta for 3 days, 4 days, sometimes walk into East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, with a reporter from Calcutta, and do my best. And newspapers will carry 1 photograph, 2 photographs. Sometimes maybe half a page, but bulk of the pictures were not published. And then it was the shortest war ever fought, with 90,000 prisoners of Pakistan surrendering to our general. And within those periods, I was shooting like a madman without thinking, without realizing what I was doing. And then the Statesman used some of the pictures, and the bundle of all these negatives. When I left the Statesman in 77, you know, my precious negatives, which I kept with myself, because Statesman was ruining the archives they were saving in Calcutta. There was fire, they lost everything. And after that, I said, I will not send my negatives to them. So I had kept them with me. When I left the Statesman, a bundle of this Bangladesh work was also kept in one of my boxes. So after 40 years, I thought, you know, everything was lost, because I shifted 2 offices from Statesman to Sunday Magazine to India Today Magazine, and then left India Today Magazine also and started doing things independently. And in this transition, all the negatives, the bundle, they were lost somewhere with the baggage I was carrying from one home to another home. And then one day, my man Friday, Amit Chauhan, who started opening up the boxes, he says, sir, kuch khas mil gaya. मैंने कहा क्या मिल गया? So he said, Bangladesh negatives. I started looking at them. I said, what wonderful feeling, yeah, that all that work I had done. Now you see the other story. S.K. Singh was a very bright officer with Government of India. I think he was director for PR, if you remember.
XP.
XP
Spokesman,
division.
He was director XP. My
Yeah.
father was joint
Oh,
secretary
okay.
Pakistan.
Okay.
I see. So he called me, he says, Raghu, the work you've done, will like you to go to the world capitals and have an exhibition. I said, what exhibition of what? He says, Bangladesh refugees. I said, no, this will be too much, doing a propaganda for the government. He says, but your photographs are so human, so powerful, and they show the tragedy and the extent of it all. I said, no, what I can do is I'll take 50 photographs of my other daily life situations, some politics, everything, and 25 of refugees. So he figured out that this guy will keep his balance going. He says, all right, you go. I went to the world capitals, and I promise you, wherever I went, first was in Paris, and La Figaro and Le Monde, they say, great times for photography in Paris because Raghu Rai is showing here. And I read that and I said, Arey, yeah, these guys, they don't understand. I thought they have Henri Cartier-Bresson, other great photographers, and they're calling me great times because I am not one of those who will say, wow, this has happened. I was so disappointed that why are they talking like this? And Henri Cartier-Bresson was the first photographer to come and see my exhibition, and he loved it. And he nominated me to Magnum Photos. And then they invited me to join Magnum Photos. And I said, how can they do this? In 72, they invited me. I did not reply. Because I said, yeah, those big guys, how can I sit with them? But we had such reverence, like my elder brother Paul, like Kishore Singh, they were 10 years senior to us. And we had so much respect for our senior people. So in 77, when I was leaving the Statesman, and that telex message from Magnum Photos showed up again. And I said, now I think I need somebody. So I sent a message to Jimmy Fox, who was the director. I said, can I do it now? He said, welcome. So this is how my association started. But my first show that brought full page coverage in Washington Post, in New York Times, in Zeit, in Le Monde, everywhere, wherever I went. First time the government of India realized what photography can do. And I remember our foreign secretary was Mr. Kaul at that time. He came to the opening of the exhibition in New York. And the ambassador, he wanted, now they were cameramen filming the opening of the exhibition in New York, and they wanted to project the foreign secretary to come and speak. They said, no, we speak to the photographer. And the coverage we got was so amazing that first time they decided to give Padma Shri to a photographer. But then, now, when this was lost and found after 40 long years, and that's where I said, let me see. But then Kishore Parekh, my senior, was also with me, and we had crossed over to Bangladesh, and he very quickly produced a book. And actually, S.K. Singh wanted me to do a book that they will send to various, missions and embassies all over the world. And I saw Kishore's book, and I said, listen, I went to SK, I said, listen, we've got a very beautiful book done by Kishore Parekh. So he looked at it, he says, yes, very good. We'll buy it. But he says, where is your book? So I said, now you got the book. You see the difference. I wasn't pushing my own book because Kishore Parekh had some 6, 7 images which were so good, which I didn't have. Then the other photographer was Don McCullin for Sunday Times. And he did some Again, 5, 6 images, very moving. And I said, wow, what a great guy. So Raghu Rai pulled it out. He says, no, I can't match them. And now, after 50 years, when I have done the book, first time I realized that, my God, that must have been.
Incidentally, that Raghu was done last year?
Yeah. That must have been divine blessings to get such intensity and magic going that even now these pictures, they move you, they shake you up. So this is how this book is born, and I'm sure, Kishore, you can write another book on the book. No, what do you want me to say?
If we can go through the slides, I think that will be, we can run through the slides and have a look at them.
Really, I didn't know the art of being a critic.
The idea actually of involving Raghu in the conversation when we were looking at this painting was, it's almost eerie the way the book and the images replicate the idea of what Chitra Prasad painted in that work somewhere. So I think the whole idea of even the title for this discussion, When Art is a Country, came out of that after I saw your book. So I promise you, Raghu. So if we can have the slides, yeah.
No, because also in creativity, may I have another 2 minutes?
Oh, of course.
In creativity, in Zen Buddhism, they say being here and now. And in photography, that is the first principle. To be instinctive and creative. When you are here and now, and if you are connected 100% mind, body, and soul, then you are connected with every inch of space, every emotion, every action, reaction that's going on. And that's where you can capture instinctively and instantaneously the power of the image, will come through those direct contact, which is very instinctive. And this is where, now you look at this lady. I have written a teardrop of agony. Her face is almost smothered with the agony, I won't say more.
Share whatever. It's your image.
A scream of silence. You look into her eyes. See the intensity of suffering. I've kept photographing her for a few minutes. All she did was, she lifted her face and looked at me with stoned eyes. And then she was just crying, and no words. The next, a deluge of human suffering. See, there I could see one of those boys, naked boys, me walking back with my parents from Pakistan to India. So it became unconsciously. It was happening in my head. Everything was something unique for me, which I was seeing all over again, which I had forgotten. Next. See the crowds. और देखिए, कोई मुझे होश नहीं क्या करना है. I am just going on clicking, but the spaces, the composition, the action, and the energies crisscrossing, I think it was so intense and powerful that every frame was being taken care by the reality itself. Like the situations like somebody like Mother Teresa. You go and photograph Mother Teresa. Anybody does her pictures. She is unique, she is powerful, she is full of intensity and energy. That anybody who will click pictures will be good. You don't have to be a great photographer. So here, Look at the intensity. Look at the expressions. And the wooden wheel, you know, with all that mud, the rain and everything. Every situation was unfolding into an image by itself. You know. Look at the fatigue in the eyes of the men and their mothers. Look at these women having a bath.
Where are these pictures taken? If you can also share that.
Inside India.
Everything is inside
Yeah.
India. Till you
What
actually
we've
go
seen
and
so
later.
far is taken here in India. ये देखिए कुछ कहने की जरूरत नहीं है इतनी इंटेंसिटी है but I'm sure you'll write a book please.
I think now you're ripping.
नहीं I am so impressed that a critic can say so much about one painting. ये देखिए what eyes, you know, stoned eyes. चलिए next. Cooking their meal. Now, this beautiful young lady was raped. She's lying like a stone, you know. Look at her eyes. I mean, now in some situations, like that old lady I was photographing, I was so close to her. But when I noticed her, I dare not go and disturb her inner space, you know. So I took it with a telephoto lens. Chaliye next. Look at this woman was also raped. I took it with a telephoto. Everywhere, wherever I turned my camera, something intense was happening. Look at that. Now, you see the woman sitting on the lawn. Look at the intensity of suffering on her face. You know. This is, he looks like Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Actually, this is his younger brother. And the Mukti Bahini had outdated rifles. They were traveling by rickshaw, by buses. They didn't have anything organized for them. Look at that. Mukti Bahini guy sitting in a regular bus. Almighty Allah crushed India. Now, this is the time, this is inside Bangladesh, when Indian army, when they bombed some of our airports, and Sam Manekshaw said, we have to attack them now. This is when the army moved in. Wounded soldiers. He was a Pakistani soldier. This is also a Pakistani soldier wounded, which they had brought to treat him. Same guy. See the pain. Tell me. Now this is where?
Niazi's left shoulder, about that.
Really? You'll get this picture, okay? इधर रोकिएगा. You see, when I went for the final, when the war was announced, so officially we asked the Defense Ministry that give us permission to go with the first column. First column is the one that attacks the enemy, facing the enemy. So they gave me a captain to take me along, and we went with the first column. The first column is the tank and about 50, 60 soldiers that they go for attack, you know. Now, the Pakistani army was withdrawing gradually, and Indian army was taking over. And then we reached a point, there was silence from both sides. And then suddenly the firing started from Pakistan side, Pakistan military. And my captain, who was taking me around, he says, Raghu, this is dangerous. Because I saw some kind of burst in the air, about 300 meters away from us, burst, and then the splinters coming down. He says, these are air bursts. And if they burst on our head, they will bring down so many splinters and can kill 5, 10 people in one go. So I was carrying, moving my camera like this, and one didn't know where it will burst. So I wasn't getting much out of that. So the first air burst was about 300 meters away, the next was 200 meters, another was 150 meters, then 100 meters. Then my captain says, Raghu, next is our turn. And we could be dead. Are you getting anything? I said, nothing. He says, Raghu, let's run. We ran and ran like cowards for 1.5 kilometers. And we reached a place where there was a chai ka dhaba and all that. So we thought we'll have chai here. And then within 1 hour, these wounded soldiers, they were brought in. So he says, see, we could have been one of them. Achha, this is General Niazi. Look how humiliated he looks. Can you make out? Chaliye next. And signing. Now, there is a story which many people don't know. General Jacob was in charge of the operation inside Bangladesh, and he very psychologically met General Niazi and told him, we've surrounded you. From all sides, we have air power, and we have tanks all around Dhaka. But if you decide to surrender, we'll look after you and your family, and we guarantee that we'll take care of all the soldiers without any more losses. So this is General Jacob telling. So General Niazi said, who told you I'm going to surrender? He says, well, I've just come to tell you. This is how the situation is. And General also told us that we were just 3,000 soldiers. And the way I have walked into his office, if he shoots me dead, there'll be no one to protect me. So he says, I looked at him and he was a little lost. So he says, General, I think you will need some time to decide. I'll come back after a while. So he left the surrender paper on his table. He says, I go back after 2 hours, and General is sitting, not even looking at the thing. So he says, General, what have you decided? He did not reply. He says, General, please. He did not reply. He says, in that case, I take your silence as yes. And then General said, okay, but I won't do it publicly. He says, this we can't avoid because 90,000 soldiers need space. So this is the Maidan, central. Yeah. And this is where we have to do it. So we'll come back later. Then when they decided that they are going to surrender, they sent a message to General Manik Shaw that we cannot surrender to General Jacob because he's a Jew. Yeah. Huh? Can you imagine? We cannot surrender him. to him because he's a Jew. And they requested that please, then General Arora was brought in. This is how the story is. So this is General Arora sitting, and General Jacob
Was on this side.
is behind him, you know. Next, please. See, people hugging. By the time surrender paper was signed, it was dark, and one was trying to take pictures here, see the movement and excitement in Bangladeshis hugging General Arora. And poor General Jacob was standing and watching. Chaliye. Now this is Tajuddin with the glasses, who was the interim Prime Minister of Bangladesh. So he was getting all the praises and everything, you know. I think this is the last one. Chaliye. Over.
That's it.
Thank you. So this is it.
Thank you for that.
Yes, okay.
I was told to bring only 30 images out of 200. So this is it.
I mean, we could have looked at those images for a long time, but yeah.
कोई moment नहीं छोड़ा.
हाँ जी.
तो आपको कैसे छोड़ा?
we'll come in with some questions on this in a short while, Raghu. But to kind of take this conversation ahead, I thought it would be very interesting if we had Raja Mohan talk to us. Raja Mohan, of course, with his role that he's played at the Institute of Defense Studies, more recently in Singapore, at the Institute of South Asian Studies. He was the founding director of Carnegie India, etc. We all know him as a very popular columnist in India today. We've read some of us have read his books, etc. So really to get your perspective now, even though we're talking about art being a component of, but art really is something that comes in as a part of multiple disciplines, etc. Creating a visual record, but there is the record that is created through journalism, through writing, through books, etc. If you can just share your perspective, partly through what we've seen here, of course, in terms of what the idea, what the perspective was in terms of what was happening at that time in Pakistan, how Bangladesh came about, etc., and the story behind Bangladesh.
Yeah, I mean, I think after the, really the photographs and the art that really captures the horrific tragedy that unfolded, and I think it will remain one of the most important events in our history of the subcontinent. What I wanted to focus was on really, from that to bring to the, to the melancholic world of politics, which is different, equally melancholic, but it's really the consequences of the tragedy, and that tragedy lives with us. The story, what Raghu captured, here and now, and what Chitta Prasad captured, the intensity and reflection from taking a specific particular but capturing the larger dimension of the tragedy. What I thought I'll do in a few minutes is really to look at 3-4 complex consequences that have followed 71. One, I think how great the tragedy might be, life goes on. That is, you don't stop. What we've seen happen, in Bangladesh, the kind of genocide that took place, or in Cambodia, where 1/3 of the population was eliminated by a ruling party. That yet life goes on. There's no closure. There's no end. You've got to pick up the
and
pieces.
still going on.
Yeah.
So,
So life, in a way, then how do we explain what follows? So in some ways, I think the intended and the unintended consequences come through, the apparent and the not so apparent outcomes. What looked so clear on December 15th and 16th, things didn't look very good just 5 years later. So the fleeting nature of what happens. But in the end, we have the political scientists, at least have the luxury of taking, say, 50 years later to think about what happened since then and the impact of it on us. I mean, I think the issues that raised by 71 are still with us. So I would say let's take some of the consequences. One, I think it looked like it was a terrible defeat for Pakistan and a triumph for people of Bengal, Bangladesh. But we saw by 75, the picture was Bangladesh was in deep trouble. Mujib was assassinated, the whole family was assassinated. And Pakistan looked pretty good actually. A
Yeah.
rationalized structure
Yeah.
of West Pakistan without, the strange case of two, countries separated by two wings, such a large distance by India. And Pakistan, one of the great consequences of 71 war, that the army was pushed into the barracks. And you had actually, the only time Pakistan got a constitution was in 1973. That is, the prospect for democratization of Pakistan was a consequence of 73. And even today, if you ask any of your Pakistani friends, the liberals of course, that it is still 73. That is what still keeps that hope, that the army in the barracks, the government, by consent, a representative government. And that's still elusive in Pakistan. But in a sense, Pakistan looked much better by mid-70s, while Bangladesh was widely seen as a basket case, incapable of governing itself. And then the tragedy of 75, where actually you have the whole ruling family was wiped out except for Sheikh Hasina. And so therefore, it didn't look. And for India, which was the 71, even now we write as the greatest triumph, by 75, you had a new government which was hostile. So this notion that that there's a closure to the issues raised by 71, it didn't. There was no closure.
Yeah.
That even today, I mean, I think I'll come to that. So in a way, if you look at the three of us after the 71, I mean, I think the immediate consequences didn't look too good. But I think if you take now 50 years later today, after 71, 52 years later, if you look at Pakistan and Bangladesh, today Bangladesh looks much, much better. That what seemed a struggling nation that would just sink under the tsunamis of all kinds, today the stunning gap between Pakistan and Bangladesh. In fact, if you take purely on the economic side, today Bangladesh's GDP is about $100 billion more than Pakistan. I mean, that doesn't fully tell you the
And
story.
even better than us?
No, I'll come to that. The per capita income.
On some indexes.
The per capita income today, Bangladesh is slightly higher than us, but Pakistan today, say around $3,000 Bangladesh per capita income today, and Pakistan is $1,500. For a West Pakistan that was higher than Bangladesh, much better in terms of indicators in 1970. Today, the per capita income of Pakistan is half of Bangladesh. I mean, you can say comparison of $70,000 in Singapore and $65,000 in, say, Japan, it's not much of a difference. But between $3,000 and $1,500, there's a dramatic, one hell of a difference of the character of the people. So that is what a society that has built itself up. And you showed the silver anklets on the woman, that the case for prosperity, today Bangladesh looks actually pretty good. I mean, its prospects as a major economy is one of the leading textile exporters. So you have actually a chance for prosperity of Bangladesh is there. The second, great result of 71, we all knew, was the decimation of the two-nation theory. The idea that religion can be the basis of nationality. That religion, the way on which partition was created, that basis was destroyed by the very creation of Bangladesh, whose movement started on linguistic questions, on the question of linguistic nationalism of Bengalis, and then constructing a society on that basis. But the story is not so simple. I mean, the two-nation theory, I mean, we finally crushed it. And Bangladesh itself reflected that, the tragedy, that the fact that Mujib was killed by 75, that Bangladesh remained a deeply divided society. Even today, for all the prosperity, it's still not one. They don't have an agreed sense of history, what you and I we just heard, that's not the history everyone believes in Bangladesh.
No, also,
No.
wait a minute. They did not, the Bangladeshis, the leaders, the intellectuals, they did not want India to take the credit
No,
that they made us win the
that's
war.
one, but the fact is, a large section of the Bangladeshi elite collaborated with the Pakistan army.
Yes.
So that's a reality, and I think those people came back to power in 1975. So therefore, this notion that you had a clear outcome in 71 was not true, and Bangladesh itself remains divided. If you can see the slogan of Hasina is Joy Bangla, and you have BNP says Bangladesh Zindabad. I mean, which kind of gives you a bit of the sense how they think of the nation. Is it Bengali first and Muslim later, or is it Muslim first and Bengali later?
Yeah.
Those issues have not been settled yet. Today, while she's strong, Hasina, the opposition to her from Jamaat-e-Islami is real. I mean, we can say, look, it's horrible at one level, but you say, after all that violence, there's no closure. So I think that is the great tragedy. And I think this way, we need to constantly remember that every tragedy, every triumph carries a bit of tragedy. That you can't have complete, like in a film, a beautiful ending. So that brings me to, I'll bring you another consequence today, which is really, if Bangladesh was the greatest moment in Indian history, if you ask the Assamese, they think it was a terrible moment for them. This is not again something we debated. Sanjeev Barua's books, he's written quite frequently, I mean quite often, quite incisively. The fact that Bangladesh war actually brought you all the millions of refugees, you had the pictures, Raghu. How many did they leave? So the fact that it is 71 war that leads to the Assam movement, the Assamese angst about becoming a minority in their own lands. That's a direct consequence of 1971 war. All refugees did not go back. And the fact that for the Assamese, that in their own land, the indigenous people will be outrun by Bengalis, the Hindu or Muslim. It didn't really matter. Therefore, the cleavage, of what seemed a great triumph produces a consequence that we are still struggling with it. If you ask, what is the Citizenship Amendment Act, which is such a controversial subject today, its roots go back to what happened in the East. How partition played out in the eastern part of the subcontinent. In Delhi, at least in the West, there was ethnic cleansing, which was awful. But in the East, it's been much slower. But the fact is, the creation of a new sovereignty, firstly of Pakistan, then of Bangladesh, did not really resolve the whole questions of identity, the kind of contradictions between Bengali and Assamese, between tribal and the plains people. That whole set of contradictions are still unfolding. So today, when you try to redress in one corner for whatever reason, it's politically, the fact that it is contested tells you the tragedy that also followed the triumph of 71. And I think so many of the issues today we struggled. It is still about partition, in that sense that it's a story, when you walked as a kid in 5 years old. But today I think the problems, the unresolved questions of peace between India and Pakistan, the question of Kashmir, the question of migration from Bangladesh for some, the question of how do you safeguard the boundaries on the east, those issues still remain with us. So the good news is some of the legacies of partition are being overcome in the east, that we have a settlement on the boundary with Bangladesh. So at least the territorial issue has been sorted out. There's still some issues of those guys what are in the enclaves. But the fact is, there is a settlement. The river waters have opened up. The trains running across the divided land of Bengal. There's more trade. Bangladesh today is our third largest export destination. So in a way, the prosperity of Bangladesh also has created the basis for a reintegration of the subcontinent, of transcending the tragedy of partition in the East. But in the West, we're still out there, still struggling to come to terms with it. And I think the questions, like yesterday, the Vaishakhi festival, and I'll stop here, you had Mariam Nawaz, who's the Chief Minister of Punjab, on the West Punjab, or in Pakistan. I mean, she met the Sikh pilgrims who went there to celebrate. She said, maybe trade Punjabi. I mean, I don't know, my Punjabi is not great. She said, look, we're all the same. We need to come together. Now, you know, I'm not going into the motivations, whatever, that we can set aside. But the fact that the Chief Minister of West Punjab is saying, look, I'm the first woman Prime Minister in Punjab, woman Chief Minister. And I got a lot of phone calls from other side of Punjab saying, great, otherwise Punjab, the Maku Punjab is really, women have not really shined in the political sphere. Here she is. Yeah. So the fact that she is, it's a hope that what you've done in the East to overcome the tragedy, parts of it at least, you can replicate someday in the West. And I think we must live on that hope. That's why the life goes on. But reflecting on the last 50 years, as I said, it is the triumph, there's tragedy, and I think it's still about partition. And there's much we need to do to finally overcome the questions of identity, citizenship, borders in the subcontinent. And I think some of those issues are today live. Nothing has ended in 71. There's no closure, as we said. But bit by bit, some positive things have happened. And I think we need to keep building on those positives to turn the whole of subcontinent into a peaceful and prosperous place.
Thanks. I know we've all kind of exceeded our time in our respective kind of conversations or presentations. So I'm going to ask simply one question each and then open it out to the audience so that we seek some kind of closure here as well this evening. Raghu, I'm going to just read something that you wrote in the book. The book, of course, is a collaboration between the Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation and the Raghu Rai Foundation. And Raghu writes in his introduction over here, an old woman looked up as I went to photograph her. Her eyes were stoned by the tragedy she had been through. A child in need of food shrieked. His eyes held a flood of tears. As a young woman, probably raped, lay next to her pots and pans, her agonized eyes did not blink anymore. The expression haunted me for days together. Back home, a few days later, I was, okay, he goes on to then narrate it further.
That line is important.
No, for me, what is important was how that impression haunted you for days together. And we saw these images that you're actually talking about. For me, what is very important to understand, Raghu, is the whole idea that as a photographer, are you a participant? Are you an observer? How close do you get to a situation? How dispassionate or detached can you be? And what does it do to you as someone who is a part of this entire exercise?
वो
I know it's a
दास कबीर ने जैसी ओढ़ी ज्यों की त्यों दर्दी नी चुनरिया. If you get colored and emotionally grabbed into situations, then you cannot bring out the intensity and truth of any given situation. And we are not social workers to get involved personally. And in any case, it was a huge, huge fallout and killings happening where nobody can do anything with a camera except take pictures. पर उसमें जो आपने पढ़ा है ना, उसमें those pictures, a child shrieking, his eyes flooded with tears, not falling, but flooded with tears. And you know, whenever I'll make a good picture, I'll bring a print home. And my son Nitin was 3 years old at that time. And I brought those pictures and I was looking at them again. And he came and he looked at the picture. He says, Papa, why is he crying? The generations will question you. And he was almost in tears to see that picture. This is how that paragraph ends.
Absolutely. That's the legacy that you, of course, bring forward. But I mean, moving from, let's say, you photograph this, then you're on to the next assignment, etc. Is there a moment of catharsis that occurs at any point in time?
No, I don't think so. Because there's a shield between the situation and me, that is my camera. That protects me. And that is where, you can go on and not be colored by any emotion. Because the moment that happens, there'll be no clarity, there'll be no detachment to situations.
I understand. Of course, a picture speaks 1,000 words, etc. So you're at a disadvantage, I have to say, when we have images to share, etc. But a painting for me is narrative. Of course, Chitra Prasad's famine work was documentative, but a painting such as this becomes a narrative. Raghu's work is definitely documentative, etc. How do you see this entire exercise of what you do as someone who comments, who reads, etc.? Is there an association? Is there an association that we can find between documentation here and the kind of documentation that you yourself seek? Also, I mean, writing particularly for newspapers and columns, etc., are works in progress, and they're bits and pieces, etc. And is it left toward generations to come to stitch it together, to see that narrative or that documentation, or how do we piece it and bring it together where we get a sense of what is happening beyond just that moment, a greater sense of history moving out?
As I said, look, the history doesn't stop. Even with the most dramatic moment, history doesn't stop. So for political scientists or those who follow international relations, it's really one to, as I said, examining the structural consequences. That no one intended there will be an Assam movement, anti-foreigner movement, a violent movement that really took so much away. The whole of Assam had to be put under a Disturbed Areas Act. So that was not imagined. So I think you have to go beyond the here and now, which is important, but the understanding what that event meant for the transformational subcontinent. After all, it ended one partition was followed by another partition. Just 25 years after partitioning the subcontinent on religious basis, you have a second partition, but even the second partition doesn't solve all the problems. So I think, for someone looking at the larger structural changes, it's really, that's the decisive moment in the subcontinent's history. And with all its tragedy, for me, what it means is, how do we prevent those kind of tragedies? What are the ways in which we can end that kind of violence? As I mentioned today, Pakistan. Pakistan is broke. Bangladesh is doing well. So what does it mean for a Pakistani today? How they reflect on the history after 71?
So my question really, as a lead on from here, is, if we look at these histories 50 years later, we have a visual history and we have a written history. When we're seeing them from a distance, from the fact that you're way beyond all of this somewhere, what is it that you will look at? The visual is visceral somewhere, it's an instinctive reaction, you react to it somewhere, becomes an emotional reaction, or is it a thought out reaction the way it would be if you're reading somewhere? What are the histories that people will look at, and what will they take away from, let's say, the visual narrative and the written narrative?
No, I think like today you are with here and now, with another set of here and now. But I think what we need, the way history comes in, I think we need to keep remembering the tragedy of 71 and also understand its consequences. And I think that's where the need to, because I don't think we've done enough to tell ourselves in the subcontinent. Even the most recent great book on partition has come from Gary Bass, the Blood Telegram. People are working on those issues, and I think we need to, in the subcontinent, tell ourselves what this means. Because otherwise, in India or South Asia, the whole of subcontinent, is everything is dust to dust. Nothing is commemorated in a serious way. Nothing stays there. 5,000 years to say, look, one more. I think that is the danger. We take things too, not devoting that attention. I think that's why keep going back to the visual representation of the moment and reflecting on it and its
It's
consequences.
also easier to relate. Much
Yeah.
easier to relate.
Because
And
yeah.
may I add another line, please? The sacredness, the sanctity of documentary photography
Absolutely.
is that you are capturing the visual history of today, which is going to be valid for generations to come, because history is written and being rewritten today, but visual history cannot be rewritten. This is the sanctity.
Very, very true. Very, very true. That's very true.
Thank you.